Hi, I'm Pearl Peng, an executive partner and chief innovation officer at Evoloshen, an international management consulting firm based in Stockholm, Sweden, that is transforming business successfully through culture across the globe. I'm the founder of my own consulting firm. I'm an executive advisor, strategist, speaker, and consultant with over 3 decades of experience working with top companies worldwide, out of which 18 years was with IBM. I'm live with you from sunny Tampa Bay area in Florida, and I'm joined by my colleague and co-host, Ms. Sayre Darling. Sayre, why don't you tell the audience a little about yourself?
Thank you, Pearl. Yes, I am Sayre Darling. I am based in very cloudy and stormy Minneapolis, St. Paul. Right now, I am an executive partner with Evoloshen, and I have my own consultancy, and I work with leaders and teams to not just manage change. I don't believe you can do that, but to leverage change to create new opportunities and different ways of thinking than what they have used currently to achieve their success. So welcome to our program, everyone. We're delighted that you're here today.
Thank you, Sayre. Today, we're excited to kick off a series of 3 programs where we'll share our findings and current thinking about organizational culture, which is at the core of how new ways of working as we head out into the post-pandemic era. In this first program, we're going to discuss creating a new culture versus fixing the old one, hence the title, Reimagine Organizational Culture. In 2 weeks, on June 4th, our second program will focus on the subject of redefining the employer-employee relationship and engagement. And in 4 weeks, on June 18th, the third and last program of this series, we're going to take on how to design the culture building process with Dr. David Jameson. Now let's get right into our conversation, shall we, Sayre?
Well, as this illustration shows, culture today is probably out of date if you are using the organizational culture you had in place before 2020. And the reason why is because 2020 had such a profound impact on how we work and how we connect. And culture today needs to support all employees where they're at, meaning emotionally, meaning where they are working, and it has to be aligned with current business goals. And I'm sure everyone's business goals for 2021 and then later this year, getting ready for 2022, are much different than what they were prior to the pandemic. So what I think confuses people so much about what culture really is, is it defined by your mission, your vision, and your values that we've talked so much about in the past? Is it all about the perks, the cool coffee bars, the pool tables, the all the benefits to make it a fun place to work that was so popular before 2020? Or is it about how you work together, treat each other, and how well you communicate and how productive you are? I think this slide is a great illustration of just how serious culture is now to helping to make the organization run much better. And our outdated views of culture of what it was prior to the pandemic really aren't going to help us be able to move forward. Let's look at how 2020 changed everything. The employer-employee contract, meaning the relationship between employers and employees, has changed significantly. Individuals are much more accountable for their own work. The leadership role just hasn't been present outside of the manager of your own team now that we're working virtually. And because we're working virtually, all of the icons that represented our culture within the 4 walls of our business are no longer visible. So we are now looking at a distributed workforce. Don't need to talk too much more about that than what's already been in the news. employees at the same time, they're also looking for organizations with a greater that have a greater desire for purpose. So where does their business fit in when it comes to addressing certain issues in the world, be it environmental, be it a customer experience? What is their larger reason for being? And that is very important to the millennial generation. But the other people that it's important to are those employees who happen to be burned out, disenfranchised. Having a greater purpose to work for will really bring them back into the fold and get them re-engaged in the workplace. Of course, diversity, equity, and inclusion, frankly, not a term that we used a great deal prior to 2020. And now every organization is creating new positions and new initiatives to broaden their diversity, equity, and inclusion. Professional development, what was regarded as a way to save your sanity, to get ahead, to keep yourself interested and engaged in your position last year. A number of people have taken on a great deal of professional development activities. So now how do we bring that back into the workplace and unleash all of that pent-up energy that people have because they've learned all of these new things? Technology, we wouldn't have survived last year as well as we did without technology, but now it's driving the boat. While technology did facilitate being a sales channel last year, it is now the way you run your business. If you look just at the employee communications function, internal communications alone, there are more than 20 different apps or different types of apps you can use to get in touch with your employees. And so technology is really running the show right now. And then previous culture, behaviors, language are frankly out of date. What was important prior to 2020 isn't even in our vernacular anymore. So on top of everything else, Pearl, we are facing a critical juncture right now at the same time that the pandemic made such an impact in our world. There are also a number of impacts that are coming together to form potentially a perfect storm. And that storm would be how to hold on to your key talent and attract new employees. So if there's decreased trust in institutions in general, we have to think about how that impacts our customers. Culture is driven now by middle managers and needs to be supported by the C-suite, not led by the C-suite. And the reason why is because everyone has much more face-to-face contact with their day-to-day manager and their teams. And the leaders who were present in the workplace can only show up now via electronically, and their tenures are changing very quickly. Sometimes C-suite executives are in their positions only 18 to 24 months. So you don't want to impact your culture when you have a high turnover in the people who are leading the organization. Leadership norms have changed. And employee flexibility has changed. Employees know they can get the work done, increase their productivity when they have a lot of flexibility, and they're not real interested in giving that back. There are new rituals, languages, and behaviors, but those are primarily happening within departments, divisions, and teams. Those can tend to create subcultures, and so everyone in the organization can feel a little bit disconnected. And culture needs to be able to have an impact for employees that go far beyond the four walls. And purpose-driven culture, we've already addressed that, especially critical for millennials. Well, this is really a huge test. There was an incredible amount of trust built in organizations last year because leaders showed authenticity, transparency, and what they say is direct compassion. But look at the first critical decision that leaders are faced with right now, and that is how to bring people back to work. And that's a very touchy conversation because leaders don't want to see as much flexibility. They want people back in the office, and how leaders do that in conversation with employees, and then staying in conversation while they also raise the expectations for performance this year to make up for what they lost last year. That's just a very difficult bridge to balance there.
Absolutely. And not to mention, you also called out the culture that is so much more desired these days by all the changes that happen. So increase the acknowledgement of being human,
Right.
the diversity and equity as well as inclusion, as you called out. And more importantly, we've also been talking about is on the emotional support in the mental health and mental wellness. So that is so very, very key and crucial in built in on a much stronger and more resilient culture.
Well, I don't see this genie going back in the bottle. Do you?
I know, good point, isn't it? So we got so much more to do on top of what we need
Exactly.
to do. And there's the leadership expectations as well.
Yeah. Yep. We've touched on this just a bit, but there's really an increased focus on the company's bottom line, productivity, etc. Leaders, even though productivity increased last year, they're also leaders also want to see a lot more commitment from employees, not just showing up and doing their job, but truly being committed, digging in, going the extra mile, versus compliance, what happened last year.
Exactly.
And, many companies who didn't lay people off, great thing to do in a crisis to build trust and appreciation with your employees, but leaders want a little bit more latitude for the understanding that they shared last year. And so the focus is on increased performance and growth. That means less latitude and flexibility. And because of a tremendous pent-up demand and a lot of transformation due to technology last year, some companies are really looking to transform their organizations. And so they need all hands on deck, working harder than ever. And Pearl, as you pointed out, there are so many employees who just don't have that in them right now. They're burned out, stressed out, disenfranchised. They have no idea what's going to happen in schooling their children where, getting daycare, loss and grief over who loved ones, family, friends they may have lost during COVID. It's a highly emotional time. But that veil between what goes on in the real world and how we run our business has almost disappeared for the first time, I think, since we have been working in the last 100 to 200 years. Business strategy might have been disrupted a bit during 9/11, but right now, business is incredibly disrupted by people's ability to come back into the workforce and bring their A game. There's a lot of people that just don't have it right now. So how do we get back into the middle and find a happy medium between what employees are willing to do and what leaders really want?
And Sayre, clearly the core of it is about trust.
Yeah, and trust is a very important part of culture. Absolutely.
When trust is not there, it changes reality, as this slide is depicting, with the brains in our human body and a happy neuroscience proven in trust influence how we think, what we feel, how we behave. And on the left-hand side, as you can see, about distrust, if the trust is not there, you see people revealing less, expect more, and assume the worst, unfortunately. And they look with caution, interpret with fear, tell secrets, and they can become yes people. They would just want to agree so that they don't get called out, unfortunately, because of the fact that they're not trusting.
Well, one thing, Pearl, that I think of when I look at this slide, it hasn't dawned on me until this very moment, is the confusion that is created when people have one foot in the being distrustful and one foot in the area of trying to trust people. You know, we're always wanting to trust people, but protect ourselves against distrust, and we still get nowhere because we're not able to work with trust. We can't count on it.
Yeah, so that's the impact, the significant impact of distrust or even mistrust, right? So
Mm-hmm.
trust will really allow people to reveal more when you have the trust. People feel that their back is hat, and they can expect less and over deliver, as you just called out. Leaders want people who are fully committed, right, to can
Right.
do and deliver more. And why would people do that? Is because that people trust the
Yeah.
leadership would lead them into the right spot and so on. And also you can assume the best, look for an open heart. Once you have that connection, it's a much deeper connection, talking about deepening the trust. So as you can see, the trust is so very important.
I
And
just like to also call out here that when there is a lack of trust
mm,
among the C-suite, among executives, it's very difficult to expect the rest of the organization to have more trust than what exists or doesn't exist at the executive level. When the executives have difficulty in having conversations and finding compromise, and they might disagree behind the scenes, but if they can't come together when they make an announcement and show they have common ground, that does not bode well for building trust in any other area of the organization.
great points. And this is where, with the trust, you get to interpret the facts and you tell the truth, and people get it, the energies and also what's being presented. If there's no trust there, it's easy to tell apart. So,
Exactly.
with that in mind, let's look at the trust arc, which is quite interesting to kind of showcase what trust looks like and distrust looks like in this arc here. And as you can see with the low trust, you have resistors, you have people who are skeptic. And as you move over to the right onto more conditional trust, people might go, oh, okay, I guess you have a point. I'll wait and see what happens. And then people start to go, maybe willing to take action to experiment about what's being proposed. And you get into the more co-creation, which is the higher trust, right, space. And that's really where most of the time you will hopefully see that your people, your organization is working in that space. So using this as a tool, and I'd like to quickly demonstrate, is that the question here is asking your people, where are you in this trust arc? And making a space, right, creating a safety space for them to express where they are. And you can also use the tool, so many good tools in online, so it can be anonymous. And I just wanted to illustrate with this depiction here. And you may have people starting to show up as, oh, I'm in this space. And perhaps you want to say that you are in a high trust space yourself as a leader, right, co-creator. And then you start to see people coming in with where they stand in this trust arc. And as you continue to see and get some result, and you would have a good picture, especially on your executive team, as they're so well
Mm-hmm.
pointed out, guess what? The big question then is about what would it take for each individual to move to the right?
I just want to emphasize how big that question is, because my guess in real life is if someone would give me this test in a very normal organization where some of the culture is positive, some of it's not so positive, there might be a great deal of suspicion about whether the results are really anonymous or not.
Mhm.
So they want to show up a little bit more positive than they are. So I would caution people when they use this as a test to not use that as the only tool, but then to also combine it with their own observations. Because someone could say they are a co-creator, but they are the most negative, skeptical person imaginable. And so that overrides their ability to really be a helpful co-creator. So I think there's a number of additional data points to be used in using this trust arc really well.
I cannot agree with you more, Sayre, and hence we are offering more tips toward the end of this program.
We are. That's exactly right.
So once again, trust changes reality. Sayre?
It certainly does. It does. So let's talk about what culture looks like when it's part of the foundation of an organization. There's a lot of conversation about this concept, the speed of trust. It's really a concept that Stephen Covey covered in one of his books, which has been out for quite some time. But I don't think everybody really knows what we're talking about when we talk about the speed of trust. And when you have trust in an organization, what they're referring to is you will have an increased level of energy, excitement, engagement in your professional and personal life. Things are going along fine. I can assume that when I talk to my colleagues about this, it's going to move forward. My confidences will be kept. I'm not going into an environment where they're backstabbing me, that kind of thing. Collaborations are much more productive. We've all been on teams where there's no trust, and trying to get equitable feedback and dialogue amongst your colleagues is like pulling teeth. It's very, very difficult when there isn't trust there. Making connections are much easier, much stronger. There's just a lot of positive energy in the workplace. Therefore, you don't have as much negative stress. You might have some positive stress due to a number of deadlines and opportunities, but the negative stress and the toxicity in the culture is not there. Therefore, your performance is increased. You are more committed. You are doing more work. You're more effective. And there's a feeling of increased purpose, satisfaction, respect for each other, that you're a real contributor. I really fit in here. I love this place. That's the speed of trust. And you hit flow. And flow, as you know, are those days when everything works and you have a sense of ease about how much you're doing and how much you can get done. So let's give folks some ideas about our new ways of working in order to rebuild culture in this post-pandemic era. Do you want to start with trust building? Oh, sorry.
Well,
Forgot this
let's
slide.
look at the pillars. Let's look at the pillars of culture, which is really putting the stakes in the ground on what pieces are
Right.
necessary to address.
Yep. As we talked about in terms of making culture the foundation rather than the fluff, culture is really tied to the purpose of your organization. For some organizations, that's really all about your number one in the marketplace, you have the best products, you have the best customer experience. But today, purpose can be much more than that. It can be aligning yourself with environmental issues, diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's a greater purpose than profitability. What are your values? You need to have values that you execute that purpose with. How are your behaviors? What are the accepted norms of how you're going to engage with people who are at your own level in the organization, who are your superiors, and who are in positions that are at a lower point in the organization. We've all been in those experiences where executive comes by and all of a sudden you put your best face on, you straighten yourself up, you throw your shoulders back, and you look like you are really into the game. Trust me, it's not often that entry-level workers or people in some of the service divisions in an organization, accounting, etc., get that same type of treatment, in as much as we still say, yeah, everyone's equal, all of our jobs are very important. We just behave differently around people who have a higher role or more significant role than we do. How do you recognize your employees? I think many companies are very familiar with continuing the practice of recognizing people for their length of service, their productivity, number of sales. Yet when we talk about our culture, we talk about how we stand for all these other things. And frankly, if you don't reward and recognize the behaviors that are important to your culture, as well as your profitability, we can't take you seriously when you say you have a new culture. You're not walking you're not walking the talk. What are the new rituals? What are the visual icons that you're using electronically, that you're using within the four walls of your business? How you present that in any type of communications, and what are the cultural cues so that we know that we are dealing with your organization because you have a signature way of how you connect with the world. This goes beyond the brand. This also deals with customer service, how you deal with employees, how HR deals with employees, how you deal with new candidates. What are your signature cues that this is an important part of your culture?
And if you hire for values with those, hire people that align with the values that your organization as well as the purpose, then the culture can be so much healthier and stronger. And as Judith E. Glaser, who has been a great author and academic business executive, often like to say, to get to the next level of greatness depends on the quality of the organization's culture, which depends on the quality of the relationships, which depends on the quality of conversations.
Yep.
So everything happens in conversations.
Yep. That's where you build trust, conversation, and relationships. Absolutely.
So with that, we have 5 categories of tips.
Yep. Yes. Now we can get to our tips. Do you want to start up with trust, Pearl?
Absolutely. Be delighted. So in terms of trust building, tip number 1 is begin by measuring the current level of the trust in your organization, as well as the critical factors needed to rebuild or reimagine your culture. Tip number 2, to have a yes and culture. Be specific in your language and intentional in your behavior. Trust can be built and sustained with smiles, jargon, or incongruent behaviors. And tip number 3, remember that building trust is something you can invest in, creating every single day with every single action. And tip number 4, redefine what trust means within your culture. What created trust in the past might not be what rebuilds culture in the future. And tip number 5, trust and culture must coexist. You can't have a healthy culture without trust, and you can't have trust if it isn't supported by a healthy culture.
That's a tricky one.
Yeah, finally, tip number 6. When you are feeling a lack of trust in someone, call it out, acknowledge it, and ask yourself why. Is it something you need to address with them in a conversation? What can the two of you do in a conversation to address and restore trust?
Excellent.
Address it sooner than later.
That's for sure. So let's go to our second category, managing difficult conversations and conflict resolutions. You know, business is a conversation, and therefore having difficult conversations is a normal part of business, yet we get so uncomfortable in doing that, terrified of asking questions, terrified of challenging the status quo, what's going to happen, that we avoid them at all costs. And what happens when we avoid them at all costs? We make mistakes, we don't hit our goals, we have workarounds, miscommunications. It can just get us into big trouble. So having difficult conversations and managing conflicts needs to be acknowledged as a healthy practice and encouraged and integrated in the culture. That absolutely has to start in the C-suite and be passed down through the entire organization. Second tip, take the time to call out the unspoken conversations. You know when you're in a meeting with people and they bite their tongue or cut their comments off before they're finished because they are fearful about what may happen. Maybe they will be judged for making an appropriate comment or saying something that's off the mark. or challenging someone that they really don't mean to. So when that happens, to make it safe, to call those out, to say, no, I really want to hear what you have to say, because what often isn't said is more important than really what was said. So calling out those unspoken conversations is very important. Acknowledge and call out conversations, language, and behaviors that create the positive energy for everyone in your culture. You know, hey, I really like the way you characterize that. That's a good reframing. That's a great word. That's much more specific. I really understand what you're talking about. And continue to use it and get more people in line with the positive language, cultures, and conversations. What conversations are possible now that weren't before 2020? Are your teams working together to get things done that you weren't able to, that you weren't able to do it in a way that you did? Or let me start that again. That are your teams working together more effectively now than they were prior to 2020? And so why is that possible? What new behaviors, what new conversations, what have you learned? Until you really call them out, you can't keep them going, and you can't bring new team members in and teach them. So take, just a few minutes at the beginning of a meeting and say, hey, what are we doing that works better? What do we want to continue? And just keep a list going, and then you're much more conscious of using those behaviors. Provide some trainings on how to have difficult conversations. One of the best resources I know is a book called Crucial Conversations, and it teaches you that two monologues do not make a dialogue. And you will learn some conversational techniques that normalize different conversations, gives you a path on how to deal with them, and you can mitigate conflict when you do have a difficult conversation. And then a point that builds on that is evaluate and train leaders' conversations, whether it's team leaders, the executives, middle managers. They need to always work on improving their conversational abilities and engage them in regular training. Remind leaders that conversational abilities are crucial to the company's success and how well all of the areas of the company are working together. How many times has an organization gone into a reorg and you ask a question of someone about what's going on and they can't talk about it because they don't have the right words or there's a tremendous disagreement? And your ability to go out and start looking for a job, if you want, yours is one of the positions that is going to be eliminated, your financial well-being rests on their ability to communicate. So I would encourage individuals to note to executives that they aren't able to communicate any better than the executive team. So how about leadership roles and responsibilities? Do you want to take that one, Pearl?
Oh, absolutely. There are just so many tips in there as well, which carries on from the previous category.
Mm-hmm.
The very first one is for leaders to get beyond titles and get to know individuals, no matter if they are in your department or not, and understand what's going on in their world and what's important to them. And this is such an important thing to do, important tip, especially in this juncture.
Yeah. You got to know more than just people's names and where they work. That
Absolutely.
doesn't cut it anymore.
And tip number 2 is develop your narrative beyond what performance management means. So it's not just about performance management, right? So the language and the narratives and concern needs to be there. It's important to understand them as individuals, as we called out, and what's really motivating them. And tip number 3 is about providing ongoing support, professionally as well as their personal development, through peer-to-peer coaching as an example, as well as learning communities. And having that is so much more important to have people recognize they have so much more potentials that can be developed and realized. And tip number 4 is watch for signs of overly stressed and burned out employees. It is so easy now these days with so many changes we had gone through, or not to mention still being faced with. It's critical to have everyone's health and well-being to work on the team where members are really engaged and supported, to have healthy boundaries. So to be open and provide additional support and clarity with ongoing priority setting or resetting if necessary. Having that open space and readiness to adopt, to be flexible is the key. Tip number 5, step up and show up as a leader by setting clear expectations on everyone's roles and responsibilities for creating and caring for the culture. And I want to underline that caring. And tip number 6, discuss and measure how your organization's culture impacts your interactions with customers and those in your business ecosystem. Remember, the business exists, right? Beyond the culture exists, needs to extend beyond your 4 walls. And number 7, last one, communicate the purpose. We cannot stress how important the purpose of your organization is. When a company is purpose-driven, you are developing leaders, and you can decide the values and behaviors are required to foster and cultivate the culture.
That's great. Now let's talk about roles, employees' roles and responsibilities when it comes to culture. And outside of employees being trained and asked and given guidance on what acceptable behavior is once they're onboarded, when they come into an organization, I think this idea is quite new, that employees are responsible for perpetuating the culture as well. We used to work with culture just with the leaders, and they were responsible for the culture of the organization. And now it's everyone's, it's within everyone's responsibility to do that. So the way you do that is to get to know people on your team, as well as in other departments that you work with closely, and understand what's important to them. You know, is it more engaging and trust building to greet everyone that's in the same way, to say, how's it going, or how's this project? Or is it more important to talk about supporting them, making supportive conversations that actually motivate them to be more committed or compliment them on the work they have done recently? When onboarding new employees, provide a thorough overview of the organization's culture, including leadership and employees' roles. Once again, in the creating and caring of the culture, employees are just as responsible as leaders for creating an equitable cultural experience for everyone. And what we mean by that is the way I experience culture as the worker in the cafeteria, the way I experience culture in the accounting department or the HR department or the C-suite or marketing or sales has to be the same for everyone. And most of the time it is not like that in organizations. Let's see here. In departments with particularly high performing cultures, healthy cultures I'm talking about here, engage employees in those departments in conversation about their best practices so they can be shared through the organization. And let me tell you just a little bit more what we're thinking about. Sometimes departments within organizations have a very tight culture. They go out to lunch together all the time. They socialize all the time. There's just almost an internal clique that develops there. And so other people tend to stay away from them. So what we're suggesting is, if you are not a part of that team with a tight culture, engage them to find out, well, how did you build a better culture? Ours isn't working that well. We want to know what we can learn from you. Likewise, if you are in one of those very close cultures, be sure to seek out other people outside of your own department, your own little subculture, and befriend them, get to know them, socialize with them, so that your team is not viewed as insular and a clique. So do you want to tackle the organizational practices?
Yes, and ultimately, altogether, it's really got to be conducted organizationally. So, as we have pointed out, the very first thing is acknowledge and promote behaviors, communications, and activities that create an upswell of positive and genuine energy in your organization. And we
Yep.
want
And what we're talking about, Pearl,
to,
you know this, we are talking about authentic positive energy. This
yes.
does not look like a cheerleading
Mm-mm.
pep rally with everyone coming together and clapping, etc. Not that there's anything wrong with clapping, but this isn't about a show. This is about a general deep feeling of good feelings, positive engagement with your employees, with your fellow coworkers.
Absolutely. And that's really super important because people have very different preferences. And this is why getting to know individuals, knowing their preferences, knowing their motivation is so important as well, as we called out earlier. And tip number two, understand and honor aspects of your culture that were in place or created to help everyone get through 2020. If you are reimagining your culture, which is what we're doing here with you, be sure to create closure, right, around the behaviors, rituals, cues, or whatever communications that you are replacing.
Yeah, that really honors what was done in the past and
Mhm.
enables people to move forward. That's so.
Absolutely. Yes, because the value have been there for the company. And tip number three is use your culture as an organizational asset with stakeholders. So it's not just limited, once again, with your company, your employees. Use it to attract customers, employees. And also this would complement as a good, those employees would be a complement and good fit with your organization, with your company.
Mhm.
Showcase your culture on your website. So we're not talking about really just showing some happy pictures and just like so that your website is showing like everybody else's website and not stock photos. So showcase and talk about, accentuate, talk about the important distinctive characteristics and behaviors, the value of your culture.
In today's world where the battle for attracting the right talent to your organization, as well as retaining your key talent, is so incredibly fierce. People getting multiple offers right now, especially working in the technology space. After a while, a certain amount of money isn't the only thing that will help employees decide whether they should work for your company or someone else, some other company. It has to do with, will I like working with these people? Is it a flexible culture in terms of where I can work? Do I like their way they engage people? Do they have a purpose in the world? All of that is important today. So you can really talk about your culture when it comes to attracting new talent and keeping your key talent. Money doesn't buy happiness forever.
Isn't that interesting, right? It can buy a convenience.
Yeah, exactly.
Might make us
Exactly.
happy, but it doesn't
Right. Right. So we could probably take just questions and answers if people want to speak up, or go ahead and put something in the
chat
chat
box.
room as well.
Hmm.
Well, all of you will receive a list of the
Oh, we
tips.
do have one question.
It's a handout. Oh, good.
The question is, how
How do
does
you?
one start the
Yeah.
process of rebuilding culture? What a great question.
Yes, we have our third program is about that specific topic. Dave Jamison, we're going to interview for that program, has worked internationally as a scholar and consultant inside
Hmm.
organizations handling that very topic. So as much as we could give you a few pointers, I would strongly invite you, encourage you to come to our third program.
The setting is in government, so I suppose we will make sure that we do address that.
In state government, yeah, that's a bit tricky, but we'll make sure we'll address that topic. Okay, any other questions or comments? And if not, want to thank everyone for attending and hope to catch you in our next two programs.
Yes, we look forward to seeing you and other leaders, perhaps from your organization, if you find this helpful. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time, stay well and be swell.
That's great, Pearl. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.